My name is Juliana Nykolaiszyn with the Oklahoma State University Library. Today is Tuesday, May 24th, 2011, and I'm in Tulsa, Oklahoma, interviewing the Honorable Stephanie Seymour. This interview is being conducted as part of the inductees of the Oklahoma Women's Hall of Fame Oral History Project. Judge Seymour was inducted into the Oklahoma Women's Hall of Fame in 2005. Thank you for joining us today.
You're very welcome.
Well, let's begin by learning a little bit more about you. Could you tell us a little bit about where you grew up and give us a little insight into your early life?
I grew up in Battle Creek, Michigan, a town of about 30,000 back then, sort of halfway between Detroit and Chicago in the lower part of Michigan. I am one of 4 children, second oldest. I have an older brother, a younger brother, and a younger sister, and neither of my parents went to college. My mother had a nursing degree. She was a nurse. My father, well, he was an interesting character. His father was a lawyer and a judge, but he broke his ankle ice skating when he was in the 9th grade. So he was out of school recovering from that, and then the summer after that he contracted polio, and which really knocked him flat. He had a leg brace on. He never went back to school. So he did a lot of goofing around, running around the country till he married my mom, at which time he was working for a bank. And he saved some money, bought some land at the end of the war. He couldn't be in the war because of he was disabled, basically, and started getting into the business of having houses built for returning service people. So he made a good living, and one thing I did in my childhood that is so memorable to me is that we traveled all over the country, mostly in the wintertime, mostly going south, but this is with 4 kids, and up until I was about in 8th grade. And I was in every state except 3 by the time I went to college, by car. And I was basically homeschooled in the car for the 3 months we would take off in the wintertime. So that was an adventure, one that I really appreciate more now that I'm older than I did when I was younger, but we had a great time.
Do you have lots of memories of visiting the different states?
I do. I mean, I remember seeing the Grand Canyon and Florida, Fort Lauderdale, when there were no high-rises on the beach. I mean, there were just nothing on the beach, just acres and acres of beautiful sand. I remember New Orleans. That was a wild place. I remember getting stung by a stingray in water off of Texas. Just, things like that. Getting up really early. We would travel early because there was no air conditioning, and quit early, try to find a motel with a swimming pool in which we'd all jump in. But yeah, I remember a lot of places and things, and we always did museums. And one year we spent a month in Florida and then went all the way up the East Coast and did Savannah, Georgia, did Washington, D.C., and all the monuments and museums, New York City, Boston, and then up, by that time it was spring, up into, did Montreal and Toronto in Canada, and came across the bridge to Detroit. Another year we went across New Orleans, across Texas, up, spent a month in L.A., and then came back through the Grand Canyon and all of that. It was great.
Did you have a favorite place?
Oh gosh, I don't think so.
Well, what a good adventure to have
It was a great adventure, and made me want to. My father was extremely well read, well, both my parents were, but he encouraged all of us to get as much education as we could, and I grew up thinking I could do anything I wanted to do.
So when you settled back down for school, I take it in Michigan? No?
No, I went to public high schools, and my father wanted somebody in the family to go to an Ivy League school, and women were not admitted in those days to places like Harvard and Yale. So I went to Smith College. Back then there were 7 women's college, all women, known as the Seven Sisters, and I went to Smith, and I loved it. I mean, it was the first time I was among all these terrific, smart women from all over the country, and it was great.
But before Smith,
Yeah,
where were you going to?
I was going to public school in Michigan,
Okay.
in Battle Creek.
So when you're going through high school, were you gravitating towards any special subjects?
I was always interested in English and literature, and I thought I was pretty good in math till I took it in college. Got disabused of that notion, but primarily not really sciences, although I took basic courses. But
And did you do anything special in high school for fun?
I was a cheerleader,
Hmm.
and so I did all the sports events. I also swam, I dived. I was a diver. That was the only thing girls could do. We didn't have basketball or anything for girls back then.
So it seems your parents fostered this
Yeah.
education, and so when you're in high school getting ready to attend Smith, what were you thinking about what you wanted to be when you got older?
I had no idea. And Smith is a liberal arts college, so you didn't have to pick a major till entering junior year. So it was basically, in fact, we were required to take courses in everything, including language and science and math, at least 1 year worth of everything. I'd taken Latin in high school, which was, I think, the only thing offered. And I took French in college. And we continued to travel. My father took all of us to Europe when I was 17, the summer I graduated from high school. We went by boat because he didn't like to fly, which is why we drove all over the place. And he bought an English Ford, which we brought back with us. It was made by Ford, but made in England. And we traveled all over Europe that summer.
Hmm. Not too bad.
So, no, that's great. I continued to do that. Got a great education at Smith and really learned that. I mean, they fostered the notion that women could do whatever they wanted to do, even though women weren't doing all that much then.
Instructors at Smith that really made an impact on your life?
Yes. First place I found out that even though I'd gone to public school, there were a lot of girls there who had been to boarding school. At first it was a big shock, but I discovered by the end of 1 year that I could compete with them. And it was really, I had a lot of professors that were just terrific. I mean, it was a constant learning experience, but the fellow that made the biggest impact, I guess, was I was a political science major. My junior year, I took a political science, constitutional law course, and that's what got me interested in going to law school. And I need to find Kleenex because of allergies and my nose
Sure.
is running, so
That's fine.
quick, grab one. Good old Oklahoma in the spring. Okay.
Going back to your siblings are you the oldest, the youngest?
No, I'm second oldest, and my mother had this all, and when my youngest sister was born, my brother was 6, and he's about 17 months older than I am, and then my next brother's about 3 years younger. My sister is 5 years younger
Okay.
than I am. And my mother is Italian, So we had I have a lot of cousins. I have 32 first cousins on my mother's side.
Big family get-togethers.
Yeah, mostly in Bessemer, Michigan, which was in the Upper Peninsula, which was fun.
So holidays are probably pretty lively.
Yeah, holidays were great, and I come from a very close family, and we had a great raucous time together because we did all this traveling.
Did your brothers and sisters also go to college?
Yes, my brother went to the University of Michigan, which is probably why I didn't, and he went to law school there. And my younger brother went to, he was the goof off in the family, probably the smartest of us from an IQ standpoint. He got sent off to Culver Military School when he was in high school because he was goofing off. Talked to my father and let him come back his senior year, and then he went to the University of Michigan where he goofed off some more. So he dropped out and joined the Army. They sent him to language school in Monterey. He took, he had his choice of Russian or French, as I recall. He became an expert in French, and then they sent him to Vietnam, where I think he did intelligence stuff. Came back, went to Harvard Business School, finished college at Georgetown. Actually, Bill Clinton was a classmate. Then he went to Harvard Business School and has lived all over the world, married a Swedish girl, has done bank-related computer stuff. I can't tell you exactly. He's landed in Colorado. My younger sister was a teacher.
Getting back to your Smith years, you're now kind of inspired to go into the legal profession.
Mm-hmm.
So you're probably trying to look at graduate schools.
Mm-hmm.
What was your thought process? What schools were you looking at applying to?
I applied to Michigan, Harvard, and Yale. And I got into them all, and I picked Harvard. And I was one of 23 women, as it turned out, in a class of 580 when we started. So that was a whole new life. I went from an all-women's college to an almost all-male environment for law school, which it was a lot of fun. I mean, I was very comfortable in my shoes by then because I just learned that when you go to an all-women's college, it's all about competing with each other and getting a good education. So I had classmates in law school who asked me how come I was there taking the place of a guy, and I would say, well, how come you're here taking the place of a woman? And I really enjoyed law school. I have more of an intellectual interest in the law, and so I love my courses. Did moot court, got on the winning moot court team, but the teams had 8, and I was the brief writer. I was not the oralist. So I had a good time in law school.
In a typical classroom at Harvard, where would you sit?
We had assigned seats.
Really?
Yeah,
Huh.
because in our classes, we were divided into 4 sections, I think. So our classes were pretty big. It was all Socratic method. The teacher called on you, so you had to know where you were sitting.
So you spent a lot of time studying.
Not a lot of time studying.
Mm-hmm. Or did it just come really easy to you?
No, law is not. It was just, it's like a foreign subject when you first start. Most of it, you just have to learn it.
Mm-hmm. And, as you're nearing the end of law school, what are you hoping for in terms of a career?
Well, when I entered law school, it was with the notion of getting a law degree and going to work for the government in Washington, D.C. I had done a research project in the summertime when I was a junior, working for I had a Ford Foundation grant, but working with, actually it was the New York government connection with the public housing program. I just had an interest in going to DC and working for the government, but I met this guy from Oklahoma and got married and moved back here and got my first summer job because the lawyer here who ended up being my early mentor wrote my husband and said, wanted to know if he wanted a summer job, and he already had one. So he said no, but my wife does. That's how I got my first job. There were not very many women in Oklahoma, lawyers at the time. There were a few older ones, and which I hadn't really known. You know, they're really in the, I think when I came back here, these women were in their 60s.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a period of time when women went to law school and became doctors, and then it sort of slacked off. In the 50s really was a time when women stayed home for the most part and didn't do a lot of extended educational work. So women lawyers, there was nobody here my age. There were a couple of people a few years older, and then there were these two older women, and that was about it.
And what part of the state were you in?
I was in Tulsa.
In Tulsa.
Started in Tulsa, and then my husband got transferred to Houston. He worked for an offshore drilling company here, and in a legal business position. So I lived in Houston. I worked for Baker Botts, which is now a huge firm, had about 100 lawyers then. But when I interviewed at Harvard for a summer job after my second year, there was a possibility that my husband would be sent to Houston because there was an office there. So we went to, the way it worked back then is these firms came and this partner spoke to the group who showed up, and then if you wanted an interview, you signed up. And I went up to him afterwards and I said, does your firm hire women? This was before the Civil Rights Act was passed in '64, and he thought about that for a minute. He said, no, I said, does your firm have anything against hiring women? And he said, no, but I do. So I said, okay, well, so I won't sign up for an interview. And that was that, and that was the firm I went to work for because I had a baby at the end of my first year here, and I was off in the summertime, and my mentor had a Princeton roommate at this firm. He called him up and said that I was moving to Houston and they should hire me. So this guy, a different person, cold called me. I had no idea that my mentor had contacted him and said that he understood I was moving to Houston, and they were interested in interviewing me. And I had my first child was about 3 months old at the time, and I said, well, I really do want to go back to work, but I don't think I'm interested in working more than 3 days a week. And there was this silence, and he said, I had them all talked into considering a woman. They didn't have any, but they'll never hire a part-time lawyer. And I said, okay, thank you, bye. So I moved to Houston in September. Got a call from this fellow just before Thanksgiving, and they were obviously desperate. Somebody had left their labor law department suddenly, and they needed a body, and I had a little labor law experience. And so he said, will you come in for an interview? And I said, sure, 3 days a week. And he said, yeah, they'll consider that. So I went in and interviewed some hiring partner, I can still see him, who really couldn't look me in the eye. He sat in it with his chair kind of sideways behind his desk, twiddling with the cord on the Venetian blind behind him, and he made it very plain that they were desperate or they wouldn't be hiring anybody part-time, and there was absolutely no commitment for anything long-term. This was a big experiment, but they were willing to hire me. And so I said, and what will the pay be? And he told me, and I said, I'm not working for that. I'm not working for a penny less than 3/5 of what my Harvard classmate, whom I called and who was working there, is making. Fiddle, 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 fiddle. Oh, okay. We need you to start next week. And I said, I can't start next week. My parents are coming for a month over Christmas. I can't start till the 1st of January. Fiddle, 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 fiddle. Oh, okay. So I got hired to start in January and found out sometime in mid-December that I was unexpectedly pregnant with my second child. So I had to decide if I was going to go to work. And I thought, well, he said, you know, no commitments, big experiment. So I just went to work and didn't tell them. And when I was about 5 months along when I told the very nice partner in the little labor law department that I was going to have to take off because I was having a baby in August. He started laughing and he said, I can hardly wait to go tell old John McCormick, who was this crusty old hiring guy, that our lady labor lawyer is going to be going into labor in August. So I took off for a year. I quit. I mean, there was no maternity leave back then. And I quit a week or so before my daughter was born. My first 2 kids are 13 months apart, which is not something I would recommend. I was off for a year. They called me and wanted me to come back. And I said, 3 days a week? And they said yes. And I said, do I get a raise? And they said yes. So I went back to work, hired a nanny, went back to work, and then my husband got transferred to Singapore, where we moved that December. So that was Baker Bott's first experience with a woman.
That's interesting that you were bold enough to negotiate.
I didn't have anything to lose, you know. I just had the attitude that I'm not working for less than you pay a guy, period. By that time, the Civil Rights Law had passed, which was putting the pressure on them to start hiring and to be reasonable about it.
So the family packed up and moved to Singapore.
Family packed up and moved to Singapore, where I lived for a year. And then, it was about a year. For all kinds of reasons, my husband and I separated at the end of the year. He left his job and stayed over there, and I came back here. I had come back for Christmas vacation, and so I had these 2 little kids and went to work for a different firm. The firm that I worked for kind of split up, and the guys that I worked with, including my mentor and a couple other people I worked closely with, were all in different law firms.
Was it tough trying to raise your young family and working?
Yes, of course, but it was really interesting because there still weren't very many women here, and the more senior lawyers didn't really know what to do with me because they really thought I should be home taking care of my kids. So I worked normal work hours. I'm pretty efficient. I brown bagged it, brought my lunch, didn't work on Saturdays, took work home if I needed to. And I was working full time, but it worked out well. And then a year or so later, I remarried my current wonderful spouse, and we are facing our 39th wedding anniversary in June. And then he was in that firm when they made me a partner. I was the 8th lawyer. Was that? Yeah. And I was made I had a baby. Yeah, it was after Sarah was born, and I was working 4 days a week after that, after a 6-month maternity leave. And there was no maternity leave. I just quit each time, and they hired me back. And I was working 4 days a week when they made me partner, and one of the big discussions I found out afterwards was, oh my gosh, was Tom Seymour going to have 2 votes because his wife's a partner in this little law firm. But at our first partnership meeting, my husband made a motion that died for lack of a second, and they decided, well, maybe he wasn't going to have, maybe he didn't have my vote in his back pocket. So I worked 4 days a week for them, had another baby 3 years after Sarah was born. So I have 4 children. And firm's very accommodating.
So you're practicing,
Mhm.
raising your family.
Mm-hmm.
What happens next?
Oh, the years go by. Tom and I married in '72. And then I had 2 more children, and we're doing soccer games, and then Jimmy Carter set up merit nominating commissions for choosing Federal Court of Appeals judges. No president had ever done that before, and no president has done that since. And there was the Justice Department, there was a committee for the 10th Circuit, which consists of 6 states, Oklahoma, Kansas, Colorado, New Mexico, Utah, and Wyoming. And there was a committee for the 10th Circuit, which consisted of 11 people from the 6 states. 6 of them were lawyers, 5 of them were lay people. And there were several women in the group. I didn't really find out all this until I went through the process, but the caseload was increasing, and the court was given a new position, and it was designated to Oklahoma, which had 1 at that point. And I was just thinking, as I said, I was the 8th lawyer in my firm. This was the 8th judge on the 10th Circuit, this position. So I applied, and it was designated here. And President Carter did this because he was looking for women and minorities. And before Carter, there had been 2 women ever on the Courts of Appeals in the U.S. One that I'd never even heard about, who was appointed to the 6th Circuit, and she was from Michigan, I think, by FDR. And there was a sitting judge on the 9th Circuit, Shirley Hofstadler, appointed by Johnson. So my husband encouraged me to apply, and I did.
Was it a tough process?
Well, tougher than I realized when I heard this story afterwards. It was an interesting process. I mean, you did an application, and you put down your qualifications, and you had to list cases you'd worked on, and judges you'd worked for, and lawyers you worked with. And then the commission was charged with sending 3 to 5 names to the president. I had an interview and got on that list. I think there were 4 of us, as I recall. There was 1 other woman who applied who did not get on the list. She was a trial judge, and she ended up on the Oklahoma Supreme Court after that. The story that I was told after the fact I was actually first told it by a friend of mine who was a friend of this woman on the committee, a woman from Colorado. She was not a lawyer. I was told this by my friend, and then subsequently by this woman herself. The chairman was a 70-year-old trial lawyer from Wyoming who wore his cowboy boots in the interview. I remember that. And apparently the same committee had proposed judges for Kansas and Utah and had no women applicants. So the chairman called a first meeting, and he'd never done this before, according to this woman. He said, well, we have 35 applicants, and we're going to have to winnow it down, so let's go around the table, and everybody will throw out somebody who's obviously not qualified. And he said, I'll start. Threw my name out. And she was sitting halfway around the table, thank goodness. She said, I was stunned because I thought you were pretty well qualified. So I said, well, why did you do that? And he said, because she has 4 children and couldn't possibly handle the job. And she said, then I was really stunned. And it was going around the table, and people got to her. fortunately for me, she was a very smart lady. She threw out the name of a sitting justice on the Oklahoma Supreme Court who, as it turned out, was the chairman's favorite candidate. And then he was stunned, and he said, "You can't do that. He's obviously well qualified." And she said, "No, he's got 5 children and couldn't possibly handle the job." So they had a discussion about whether that was a disqualifying factor, put both of our names back in the pot, and he and I both ended up on the list of names that were sent to President Carter. So, but for her quick thinking, I was in file 13. She got me dragged back out.
And then from that list, Carter makes his decision.
Yeah, and I was the only female, and that's the reason I got the job. I was young, and there were a couple of African Americans. Harry Edwards on the D.C. Circuit was one of them. Mary Schroeder was one of the women from the Ninth Circuit. We were all 39, as it turned out.
How did you receive notification?
I got a call from, then there was the whole ABA process. You want to hear this story? It's another, you can't handle the job because you have children's stories. And the one here was another older trial attorney, and he had a favorite on the list who was not me. I was called by somebody in the Justice Department and told that my name had been forwarded to the FBI and the ABA, which is the way they do it before you get officially nominated. And the FBI did a check, and I got all kinds of feedback from people they called, and they were done really early. I was informed by the Justice Department, I think, in January of the year I turned 39, so I guess I was 38 when I had my interview. And nothing happened. Nothing happened with the ABA. There's deafening silence. Nobody, I had listed all these lawyers I'd worked with, judges I'd worked with. Nobody, I had no feedback. So I didn't know what was going on. Then one day this guy called me in September, the representative, and said, "I'm going to be in Tulsa this afternoon. I want to come and interview." I said, "Okay." He came and interviewed me, and all he asked me was about my family. He didn't ask me anything about how I would handle the job or what I thought. It was a very short interview, and then he leaked to the press that he was proposing to rate me unqualified for insufficient trial experience. That was what he said. So it turned out that the Justice Department, Carter, the Attorney General, had appointed 2 women to sort of mentor the women going through the process. One of them was Barbara Babcock, who was subsequently a professor. She was working in the Justice Department. She was subsequently a law professor at Stanford. I don't remember the name of the younger one, but the younger one called me and said that the ABA, that the Justice Department had done their own background check because of this length of time. They were concerned, and they had called my references, and the ABA contacted them and said that they were proposing to rate me unqualified. Did Carter want to withdraw the name? And they said, "No, she's perfectly qualified for the job." And by that time, as soon as he leaked to the press, I got hold of the rules for the ABA rules for the process, and they're supposed to inform you if they think you're not qualified in the interview and tell you why and give you a chance to respond. Well, they hadn't followed their own rules, and I immediately wrote a letter to the head of the ABA, the head of this ABA committee, the Attorney General, the nearby world, saying that the ABA had not followed the process. And so when the ABA went to the Justice Department said, "Nope, we did our own background check. You didn't follow your process. We're objecting." So they appointed another guy who had been chairman of the ABA committee previously, who then did his own background check. I started getting calls from lawyers who were contacted. He came out to interview me, and I passed. They rated me qualified.
Was that a concern, your trial experience?
Yeah, I had not had a lot.
Mm-hmm.
I really hadn't, but you don't need a lot to be an appellate judge, because you need to be familiar with, I'd taken depositions and I had argued motions and I had sat through trials, but I had never tried my own case. Most of my work was defense oriented, and most of it I'd won a lot of great summary judgment motions. But I really did not have a lot of trial experience.
So you're in the post,
Mm-hmm.
new judge.
Mm-hmm.
What is a typical day like in those early years?
Really crazy, because I didn't have an office. I had temporary space here. And you're really behind in the law clerk hiring process. I hired a woman here who lived in Tulsa, who'd gone to the University of Tulsa. And she ended up staying with me for 20-some years. She was my first hire. And then I got two fellas who, one graduated in the middle of the year from the NYU Masters in Tax program, and then I got a fellow from Michigan. They were my first law clerks. And then Joan, my secretary, came with me from the law firm. So she's been with me she's worked for me probably 34 years now. She's fabulous. So we didn't have computers back then, and I pretty much was in the dark. I got confirmed end of October, and I sat on the court for the November term. They gave me a couple of days of cases and an en banc.
What's that?
That's when we sit in panels of 3. We had 8 judges back there. You sit in panels of 3, and senior judges helped out back then, so they sat. So you get a case gets en banced if the losing party petitions the whole court and claims that the panel opinion is contrary to other circuit opinions, or is wrong for this, that, or the other reason, and then somebody has to poll the court. That's the process. If nobody polls the court, the en banc court, for a vote, sometimes it's somebody off the panel who's interested in the issue, and then the active judges vote, and if a majority of active judges vote to rehear it, there is a rehearing en banc, and the whole court sits for oral argument and then for the opinion.
So are you hearing cases the whole year, or just certain times?
We sit, the circuits I discovered early on all operate differently. And we are one of the few circuits that come together for a term of court, all of the judges, the same week, and we have those weeks every other month. And we hear 6 cases a day, which is sort of like final exams when you first start, but you get used to the process. And we sat 5 days. We sat every day when I first went on the court. Now the active judges tend to sit 4 days, and I sit 2, which I get to spread out. And that's because we have oral argument only in about 35% of the cases, 30%. Maybe not even that these days. The rest of them are on what we call on the briefs, submitted on the briefs. All the cases have briefs, 50 pages aside, plus a 25-page reply brief is what's allowed. It could be less than that. Often is, but sometimes not. And sometimes you have amicus briefs, and sometimes they'll come in and stack for one case will be like this because of motions and all kinds of stuff. So the panel will hear the cases, 3 judges will hear the cases that are assigned that they've read the briefs in, and then they have a conference afterwards and tentatively say which way they think the case will come out based on the briefs and the argument, and then the chief of the panel, which is the most senior active judge on the panel, assigns the cases for writing purposes, and then you go back home and that's where you write them and you get the record in the cases assigned to you. Plus then you have all these cases on the briefs that just, you're on separate panels for those, and they get sent to your chambers, and those are done without oral argument.
And are you hearing cases in Denver, or?
Yes, that's the seat of the court.
So you have lots of traveling.
Yeah, but only every other week. And I do, and at the beginning that was, I was leaving my husband here with children ages 2 to 12.
Fun times.
Fun times, but he likes to cook, and he, it was great for all of them, and I have a great family. Any
Challenges during those early years?
I love the job because it's very academic. We're reading and writing and asking questions about what you're reading, and then talking to your colleagues about a particular case. Of course it was challenging. I had not done criminal law. 20% of our cases our criminal cases were then, still are. So that's a learning curve. But they tend ultimately to be the easier of our cases because of reoccurring issues. So after a year I was comfortable doing that. But every day is a new day. We have a broad range of cases in federal court, every kind of thing you can imagine that Congress, every law that Congress passes can become something in a lawsuit. We also have what's called diversity jurisdiction, which means we get state law cases if one of the parties is from Oklahoma or one of the other 6 states, and the other party is a non-resident. The non-resident is entitled to, or even the resident, if they're suing a non-resident, are entitled to file it in federal court. Or if a local resident sues somebody from another state in state court, then the person from the other state is entitled to file a motion to remove to federal court, and that's from the notion of not getting hometowned. So we'll have actual state law questions in those cases.
So you really have to keep up with everything.
It's on the job training on every new area of the law you get. After, for a period of time, we'll get a series of cases, like when Penn Square went bankrupt. We had a whole series of those cases. In the energy, early 80s, when we had energy problems, we had a whole slew of energy-related cases. Then we got a whole slew of sentencing issues, criminal sentencing, when Congress passed the Sentencing Reform Act and set sentencing guidelines. So we tend to get those, but otherwise, you get an environmental case or an Indian law case, and it's just, then you get, when you get subsequent Indian law cases, you've gained some familiarity with the area, but it could be on a totally different issue. So it's a fascinating job.
And eventually you became the chief judge?
Yes, not by popular acclaim. It's because the chief judge in the circuit is the senior most active judge, which means you haven't taken senior status. The next senior most active, so when the judge immediately, my senior, takes senior status or retires, that's when I was, if Monroe McKay, who was a Carter appointee from Utah, was the chief before me, and he quit early. He quit when he turned 65 and took senior status. And so I became, if he had stayed his full 7 years, which is the term, I would have become chief judge when I was 58 and then served my 7 years and be able to take senior status. As it was, I became chief before I turned 58. I don't remember what call that was, but it was in 1994. Well, 54. And I served from then until 2000. And then I was followed by Danelle Taha, a Reagan-appointed woman in Kansas. So our court had 14 years of feminine reign, and we shaped them up.
How is the job different when you're chief judge?
You get a lot of administrative work that's annoying. As Judge McKay said when I got sworn in as chief, that he was handing me the reins of power that unfortunately weren't attached to anything, which is true, because you have no power over your colleagues in a sense. They are independent judges. What you have is a lot of administrative stuff and judicial misconduct complaints. The chief judge has to decide and sit on every one of those, and there are a lot of wacky ones. Pro se prisoners, all kinds of stuff. So it was annoying, and I didn't like that part of the job. But you sit on the Judicial Conference of the United States as the representative of your circuit, and that body is a policy-making arm for the federal courts and consists of the Chief Justice of the United States, who chairs it, the chief judge of each circuit, and then a district court judge representative from each circuit. And in our circuit, the district judges pick their own representatives. And when I first went to my first meeting, I was seriously considering quitting being chief, because it's all this, you have to cut back on your legal stuff because it takes so much time. I seriously thought about quitting until I went to my first judicial conference, and I think out of this body of, it may have been, there are 12 circuits, so that's 24, plus the chief, plus the federal circuit, and court of claims. There's maybe 28 or 29 voting members, and in the first batch there were 2 other women besides me. So I decided I owed it to women in the federal judiciary to stay on as chief. So there would be a female representative to the judicial conference, and I really enjoyed that part of it. When Rehnquist became Chief Justice, he was a very, very good administrator, and he opened up the committee system. Before that, it was all good old boy. The committees would get appointed, judges would be put on, the Chief Justice picks the judges for each of the committees, and which are broad, and they do have power over rules, recommending federal rules, evidentiary rules, and all kinds of other things, the budget, the judiciary budget. And before Rehnquist, each of these committees was composed of guys who, and the chair would stay in for years and get reappointed. Rehnquist totally opened it up, sent out questionnaires to ask people, judges, what they were interested in being on, and set a rule that you can't be on a committee more than 6 years, 2 3-year terms, even if you're chair. And I had actually been appointed to a committee by Chief Justice Berger, the Defender Services Committee, before I became chief, before Rehnquist became Chief Justice, and then he appointed me chair of that committee. And that committee governs all of the federal defender indigent defense, federal defender offices, and the panel attorneys, and it was a really interesting, fun thing to be doing. And when you sit on the Judicial Council conference, you vote on proposals from the committees coming out of, and so you get involved in all of the really interesting policy decisions for the federal courts. And that was fun.
Just right up your alley.
Right up my alley.
Yeah.
Administrative stuff was...
Not so much.
I mean, I'm talking judges fighting over whether they get parking spots, all kinds of stuff, space and facilities for the whole circuit. And misconduct complaints not just against judges on my court, but against a federal district judge, a federal bankruptcy judge, or a federal magistrate judge. And there are a lot of those judges in the circuit. And
Wow.
it's just a constant mostly annoyance.
So you were happy when your time as chief judge?
I was very happy with and employee disputes, all kinds of stuff.
Well, you left the chief judgeship in 2000, and then you assumed senior status in 2005.
Mm-hmm.
So explain
On my
to
birthday.
me.
When I
Really?
turned 65, yeah, that's when you're eligible.
Wow. What's the difference now in your role?
I don't sit on banks. I don't get to vote on banks. I can poll the court if I'm on the panel. And if I'm on a panel and the case gets unbanked, then I can sit as a senior judge. But otherwise, senior judges don't participate in the en banc process, which is just fine with me. I am perfectly comfortable letting my colleagues make those decisions. I had people telling me, George W. Bush was president when I took senior status. I had people telling me I should wait until a Democrat got in, but I don't believe in that. I think the system works fine the way it is. It's gotten much too politicized. I think people who are good, who are proposed by either president, should be, who are nominated, should be confirmed by the Senate unless they've got, problems with their abilities. But I don't think they should be picked apart for their, really for the president's political views, because we're not supposed to have any, and in most cases, it makes absolutely no difference when you're deciding a, environmental case or a corporate case or an energy law
Politics
case.
shouldn't even come into play.
No.
Yeah.
And they really don't come into play.
Mm-hmm.
So I gave up my seat and was replaced by a Republican who's a super terrific judge. And Danelle, my Republican colleague and friend since '85, just took senior status in January, and then she's retiring to go be dean at Pepperdine.
Mm-hmm.
And she told me, she says, I'm following your lead, and she gave up. She's conservative Republican, and she gave up her seat because the system really works. I have great colleagues, and we do not decide cases because of our political views. We just don't.
So looking back on your career, best part about serving on the bench?
It's just the world's greatest job if you like the law, which I do. It's fun, it's interesting, it's different every day. I get to hire law clerks from all over the place, and I hire clerks who are smart, and we have an overabundance of applications from smart law clerks, so I tend to hire people that I want to spend a year with, which is because work in a very small, cloistered environment, so and I like my job, like my colleagues, love going to court and doing oral argument, and I get great cases on all kinds of fun issues, including constitutional ones.
Do you have time to mentor?
I don't get much opportunity to mentor other than my law clerks.
Mm-hmm.
I've had a couple of externs from the University of Tulsa over the years, but we really don't have space to put somebody, so that makes it difficult. And when you're working full-time in this job, it's a heck of a lot of work. In fact, after I took senior status, ever since then I've wondered how I did this job full-time. But my husband and I are traveling a lot, so that's fun.
So are you looking at retirement soon?
No, I like doing what I'm doing. My husband's finally slowing down, but we have 9 terrific grandkids. Our kids are scattered all over the country, and so we visit them a lot. They visit us. We spend the summers in the mountains of Colorado, which I love, and I can do work from there because of laptops and FedEx.
And this is a lifetime appointment?
This is a lifetime appointment. I can die with my boots on if I want to.
Well, you've had a strong educational background at Smith and Harvard, and can you describe some of the places where, we don't always learn it in the classroom, where you learned the background you needed for your career?
I learned a lot in my travels. We traveled to the South when I was in, one of these early travel days when it was a very segregated place. And I learned, my father, both my parents are I went to totally integrated schools in Battle Creek. There's one high school, integrated teams, integrated cheerleading squad. So going south was like a foreign country back then, seeing signs that there are no black people allowed, that kind of thing. So that became part of my education. Traveling all over the world and seeing different cultures, and really expanded my horizons, I think. That was part of my education. It was a big part of my education. So I tend to take a kind of probably a broader view of things than I otherwise might have. And I'm an adopted Oklahoman. I'm really happy to have, when I first came here, it was also like a foreign country. But I was coming from Cambridge, Massachusetts, and of course there was no liquor by the drink, which meant there were no good restaurants, and it was just a real change for me. But Tulsa's a great place, and it's been a great place to raise kids, and as you know, things have changed over time in that regard, and we now have some great restaurants. And a lot of interesting people have moved to Oklahoma. The energy business has brought a lot of people from other places here, and so it was a great place to raise kids. It was a great place for me to be able to have a career, because the work, people here don't work like they work in New York and California. If I'd gone to work for a big firm in New York, I would have had a much more difficult time having 4 kids and taking those maternity leaves and coming back and working part-time. I probably couldn't have done it.
Well, it's probably also a good statement to your work ethic when you were working before maternity leave, because they obviously wanted you to come back.
Yeah, they did. No, this was a great environment, and we had an older home near Philbrook when nobody was buying in that part of town, and that's where we raised our kids. And they went to Lee Elementary School, which was in between there and first my office downtown and then here. So it was easy to take off for school conferences and all that kind of stuff. It's just been a great place to be able to have this kind of job and have a family.
We've talked about some instances in your career that were, a little bit of a stumbling block. Any that come to mind that we haven't spoken about?
Oh, just odd comments from people from time to time. I had one of the partners in the firm I ended up working for almost 10 years for before I became a judge, wanted me to go by my first initial and my middle name and my last name, so the clients wouldn't know I was female, although they found out if they showed up in the office. I got comments from guys from time to time about what I was doing, but nothing horrible. I tend to sort of laugh off those kinds of things. And when I went to court here, I was treated very favorably. There was a federal trial judge here, the only federal district judge here for years, liked women.
Mm-hmm.
He liked me, and it was gentlemen and Mrs. Seymour in the courtroom. And one time I was in a conference with other lawyers. We were having a pretrial conference in his conference room down the hall here. And we took a break. We called her Judge Marilyn, his career law clerk, would run these things. And it was a big bank case, as I recall. And we took a break to go to the bathroom and make phone calls. And I had been to the bathroom and I was coming back down the hall. And the judge came out of his chambers and he threw his arms around me to give me a hug. And I was looking over his shoulder when the lawyer from Oklahoma City on the other side came around the bend and went. So, kind of worked both ways. When I went on the court, there was one lovable Irish judge from Colorado who was senior and getting a little irascible, let's say. And he would, on a case, he would go after the other. If you disagreed with him, he'd take after you personally. I mean, it could be nasty. So when I was on a panel with him and another judge, if the other judge wanted to raise some disagreement after the fact, he'd call me and have me call Judge Doyle, because Judge Doyle was this Irish Catholic gentleman and he didn't believe in treating women like that. So he was always very nice to me, even though he would ream out my colleagues. So we called it hiding behind my skirts. It hasn't always been a disadvantage to be female.
Sure. And you've also traced, you were a trailblazer for many others, I'm sure.
Only because I came first, and there were so few of literally when I graduated from law school in 1965, only 3% of the law school graduates in the country were women. Mm-hmm. By the mid-70s, it had gotten close to 50%. Certainly by 80, it changed that rapidly. So I was just the beginning of a huge tide of women starting to go to law school and other. But when I first came here, the other thing about it is I was separated from my husband. I was back here with 2 little kids. I went to get a Sears credit card. Mm-hmm. And I had filed for divorce, and they wouldn't give me a card in my name. It had to be in my husband's name. I said, he's in Indonesia. We're getting divorced. We don't care. And if you're married, it has to be in your husband's name. So all of that was, then the Fair Credit Act got passed, and all of that was changing really in the 70s when I was practicing here. And so my firm, if we ever got an employment discrimination case, employment issue against any of our clients, I was the one that would get it, just because they figured, I don't know what they figured, but I was on top of those things, shall we say.
Right place, right time.
I was right place, right time, absolutely. And a president who was interested in, I'm sure he was getting kicked by Roseland, was interested in putting women on the bench. Otherwise, I didn't have political contacts here. I wouldn't have gotten my job but for that. It's totally right place, right. And I was young. So a lot of my career has been right place, right time.
Career highlights. Looking back.
Oh gosh. Hard to say. Being the first woman in a lot of things is fun, It really was. And talking to younger women coming along, it was interesting because somewhere after this great surge of women began to think they couldn't have families, couldn't see how they could do both. So I've spent a lot of time talking to women about that. I think women should start their own law firms if they're in firms that are not family friendly. I mean, you just have to, because I think people should have a balanced life. I don't think women should not turn into workaholic guys in their careers. And I don't think workaholic guys should be family men should be workaholics either. And I think that's changed some. I know my daughters, I have a son and 3 daughters, and I can tell you that my daughters' husbands would not get away with being, putting everything on their wives to handle. Times have just changed, and it's been fun to watch that. It's been fun to see, when I first became a judge, there were hardly any women in the courtroom, and that's changed drastically. Lots of women in the criminal cases, lots of women assistants and U.S. attorneys and federal defenders and panel members and lawyers for corporations, and just a lot of women. It's been a really fun thing to watch. One case that always pops into my mind is Brown versus Board of Education, which I sat on in the early 90s. Looking through my briefs for oral argument, Brown versus Board of Education, I'm thinking, how can this be? It was the daughter, Linda Brown Smith, who was the little girl in that case, filed on behalf of her daughter, claiming that the Topeka public schools were never integrated. And the case had never been closed. It came back from the Supreme Court. And I don't know, they made a few changes in the school system, I guess. And the case, the district court never gave up jurisdiction in the case. I don't know why. She just reopened the original case on behalf of her daughter, and had been through federal district court. She lost, came up here on appeal. And we reversed and said, they threw her out on summary judgment and saying there weren't sufficient facts to raise a claim, and we reversed and said, oh yeah, there are. And they ended up settling and creating a magnet school program in Topeka. But imagine my surprise. I just had a lot of interesting cases. I got an award from the Federal Bar Association a few years ago, a civil rights award, which pleased me. So I like that.
Now you were inducted into the Oklahoma Women's Hall of Fame in 2005. What does this
Allergy break.
Oh, sure.
Go ahead.
What does this honor mean to you?
It meant a lot. I was surprised and very pleased because, as I say, I'm happy to be an Oklahoman now, and I'm happy that women were being recognized. And when I looked at the women who had been given this award, there are a lot of great women in this state. A lot of them were pioneers just because they were getting into areas that women hadn't previously been accepted in. It's a nice group to be among, and I think it's really neat that Oklahoma does that.
Well, as a transplanted Oklahoman, what does Oklahoma mean to you?
It's totally different as a state than the one I grew up in and other ones that I visit on the West Coast and the East Coast, but people here are extraordinarily nice and friendly. My law clerks come from all over, and they invariably comment about how nice people are here. And it's very noticeable now when I leave and go someplace like New York City. In fact, my oldest daughter, who lived in New Jersey, or married a guy in college who was from New Jersey, and they lived there for a while and came back here, where they lived and worked for about 4 years, and she said, the first time she went to work out, she came home, she said, "Oh my God, I love this place." She said, "I went to reach for the weights, and a guy got there first and handed them to me." She said, "If I'd been in New Jersey and I'd gone to reach for the weights and I'd got there first, the guy would have snatched them out of my hands." And I think that's a perfect description of the difference in people's attitudes here. You know, it's just a great place to live.
If you could tell Oklahomans anything, impart some wisdom, what would you tell them?
I would tell them to broaden their perspective, because if you grow up here and you never travel to the other states, you have a totally different perspective than if you go someplace else to visit, to live. You just do. I mean, people come from all over, and of course we have people here who come, a lot of people come in with the petroleum degrees who come from the Middle East or Asia, and you can learn a lot from them. I just learned traveling around that people are basically people.
Mm-hmm.
Wherever you go, they're all interested in their families, their children getting ahead, and having a good job and having a decent life. It doesn't make any difference if they were born in rural Africa or New York City or Timbuktu. And you don't really sense that unless you go to those places and learn that even though their culture may be very different, they're basically, people are people.
Of course, you know, many people look at you now as a role model for everything you've accomplished. How important is that?
It's been nice to be a role model. As I said, it's sort of, I feel like an accidental role model. But it's nice to think that I may have influenced younger women to do something they might not otherwise have done, like apply for a judgeship, take a chance on something, realize they can have a career and have a family, anything in that regard. It's been very nice. It's been fun to be I have all these great stories about stuff I went through. I took exams. I took 4-hour final exams in an old building at Harvard Law School that had no women's bathrooms, for example. I mean, you know, times have changed, and women, I think a lot of women don't realize how lucky they are, how different it was, not in a pretty recent past.
Would you like to make mention of anybody who's played an important role in your life?
You know, my dad and my husband both have been. My father encouraged me to do, he did, even though he hadn't gone to college, he encouraged all his kids to get the best education they could possibly get. And my husband has been so supportive of me and everything that I've done, which is, you know, really nice, considering he came out of a different era as I did. So, and he still is. It's great.
And family is still a big part of your life now.
Family's an enormous part of my life. Love those grandbabies. Well, I enjoy my kids. I mean, we talk on the phone all the time. And it's fun to watch kids grow up, become their own person.
Well, before I ask my last question, is there anything else you'd like to add that I haven't asked you about today?
Good grief, I don't think so.
Well, when history is written about you, what would you like for it to say?
I would like it to say that I was known for respecting every human being as a human being and respecting other people's views, even though they're directly contrary to mine. I think that's missing a lot in our society today, but it's what this country was founded on, and I think it's important, and it means a lot to me to have an open mind about things.
Well, Judge Seymour, thank you so much for taking time out to meet with us today.
You're welcome.
I really appreciate it.